What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex. In this video, I want to talk about a few details that we learned about Assassin's Creed Mirage through their Reddit AMA. Now, I know this was several days ago, and I know that they answered dozens upon dozens of questions, and there's some good tidbits in there, but I want to talk about two specific things that jumped out to me, one of which being DLC and the other of which being the lane. Two topics that I tend to kind of gravitate towards, on the channel. So in terms of DLC, there is none. That's what they say. For now, Mirage has no plan for DLC or extensive post-launch. I'll give you my thoughts on that in just a second. And then in terms of the game's length, they were flat out asked about how long it'll take to 100% the game and how big is the map. And now the answer doesn't necessarily talk about 100%ing it, but it does say in terms of playtime, we are closer to the first AC games. Now, what I did is I went back to howlongtobeat.com, fantastic website, and the place to go for like the average length to beat any game. And Assassin's Creed 1, I believe 15 hours is to beat just the game itself, and then main and side stuff, if you do at least most of it, it's around 20 or so hours. Assassin's Creed 2 is a little bit more than that. I believe to do the main and extra stuff, you're coming up on 25, 26 hours. Then Brotherhood actually brings it down again. So you never really cross, if we want to try to make it like a nice number, to do most things in the game, 25 or so hours. To do just the main stuff, maybe 15 to 20 hours, right, is kind of the average. So that seems to be the length of time to beat Mirage, which, as I've said before, I mean, we could kind of assume that's what it was going to be. We've talked about the map size before. We know that this is going to kind of feel a little bit like those older age Assassin's Creed games, and it's supposed to kind of shrink it a little bit, right? This is not an Odyssey or Valhalla or Origins sized game, so you wouldn't expect to sink 50, 60, 70 hours in. I don't really want to. I don't really need to. I guess that's technically the point of the next game that comes out, right? Codename Red. That is the game that you're going to want to spend 50 plus hours in. So I think the length is kind of perfect for this game. It's also good in when the game releases because it's up against a lot of other games that I also want to play. So I like the length. And then in terms of the DLC, I'm actually completely fine with it. That's my short opinion of it. Again, much like what I just said, this is not something I think that's intended to be gigantic. In fact, this was started as DLC, right? The kind of idea of like a spin-off Basim game. So it doesn't really make too much sense to have a game that kind of would have been birthed as a DLC to then have DLC of its. I'm sure there's examples of that probably happening in the industry. But again, much like I just said for the length, I think it's kind of best for everybody. You shrink it, you go back to some basics on some things in this game. You please newer fans of AC, you please older fans of AC, and it's a game, again, you go in 15, 20, 25 hours. You don't need to support it for 2 years through DLC. There's a right and wrong time to do something like that, and this probably isn't the right game for it. So I'm happy with it. There were a few things in the AMA that weren't amazing, but overall, I think it did what it needed to do. I think it made people excited. I guess the only thing that I don't love is when they talk about actually the movement of parkouring. Let me just quickly talk about that actually because I find it interesting. So they say for parkour, we're focusing on fluidity and control and building our own thing, taking inspiration from several ACs. Back ejects and side ejects, as in the pre-AC3 games, are not part of our parkour system, but we put in a lot of effort working on small details to make sure players have the best control on Basim. We are still fine-tuning the parkour, etc., etc. So the reason I want to kind of throw this one in, I see a lot of talk about this online. In some ways, I don't mind the newer, I guess, parkouring, right, movement of the assassins in these games. There's something kind of cool to the, I guess, automatedness of them. On the other side of things, I do miss the more kind of careful planning with like picking where you're able to move around. Or, I mean, there were some negatives because you could be very, very stiff. Half the time you would jump off when you didn't really mean to, right? You meant to do something, and Ezio will literally just commit, let's say, something against himself that'll eliminate him, right? There's a lot of things that happened back then that weren't good, but I have seen this kind of has upset people a little bit because of that automatedness. You can see it in the movement in Assassin's Creed Mirage that you pretty much just flick the analog stick straightforward, and it seems like a lot of things are just automated. Again, in some ways, it looks still really cool. I like it. You think back to like the Syndicate era. That looked really cool, but I can see, I guess, the pro and con. I can see people liking it. I can also see people not liking it, but there you go. There's kind of more of a feel that it's probably going to feel more like the newer aged AC games versus like literally movements and jumping around and climbing things. You're probably not going to feel like you're Altair or Ezio. Again, some of that stuff was actually horrendous and really, really bad, but some of it felt pretty like it felt real. It felt like that's what those characters would actually, not jumping off to commit the S word, but like, everything else, I suppose. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure you guys are subscribed, bell icon turned on, and I hope to see you all on the next one.